Stopping the waffle. So what am I doing? I've got some behind me just there, some Peter Pig World War I infantry, and they're 15mm scale. So I'm posting them in my 15mm Grunts 15mm blog, even though they're not sci-fi. That's where I'm dumping most of my videos at the moment, in addition to YouTube. So I've also got in front of me some of these new paints from Games Workshop. They're contrast paints, and I'm going to try them on these historical figures. I'm going to try and match the colours. And I've done no pre-testing, so this is going to be like a live, is that colour going to be good? No, and just a general tryout. So I shall grab the models, which are over here behind me, and we shall go from there. So fortunately what I have is some of these are painted in my old style, and some of them are ready to take a new set of paint. So if I pop a couple of things out to look at from this set, so essentially the 15mm, they're on plastic card bases like this. I make little sort of vignettes, dioramas for the commander kind of leader models, and also for the machine gun types. So I'll get out what I've got already, and then we'll try and match them using the new contrast colours, because I used Vallejo on these when I painted them. So I'll get out a couple of examples of them finished, and then try on some ones that I haven't done yet. So I need to grab some more. Aha, an infantry base that has not had any paint on it. So there's one. Maybe I should do a machine gun. Yeah, let's do a machine gun at the same time. That'll be fine. I did have some artillery too. I won't do that. I'm trying to keep this a bit shorter instead of going on for sort of 3 or 4 hours at once on these streams. So yeah, so I have before me, they're from company Peter Pig, they're 15mm scale. I'm going to use the Citadel contrast paints. These, I call them Citadel all the time, but they're Games Workshop. Obviously there's no such thing as Citadel anymore, is there? Or is there? Shame they don't use that somewhere. I wonder if they do use that name, Citadel, anywhere. So yeah, I bought these contrast paints. They're the latest and greatest thing from Games Workshop. They had to breed macaque monkeys specially for this, because they use their scent glands to create most of this stuff. That's why it's so rare and precious. No animals were harmed, obviously, but yeah, they've been looking good. So far I've tried them out on some fantasy models, but I thought I'd try them on these historical models that I've got here and see how I get on. So without further ado, I shall go in closely to the operation by hitting this cut button over here. Okay, so what have I got down here? Well, normal mess, but I've got my tissue for wiping things off. Over here I've got the water, and a whole range of these paints, these Citadel contrast paints. They're very thin, and I've already noticed I didn't put the lid back properly on. That's one thing to watch with these. Make sure you take care to close the lids on these. I had a set of these paints, some of their foundation paints, that were kind of chalky, and if I didn't close those lids down, they just dried out. But these ones are very liquid. I'll pop them open so you can sort of see the water-like liquid swirling around with a very, very strong pigment. I mean, that's ultra strong pigmentation in there. You can see on the clear lid it's almost dark. Given that's a transparent paint, that's quite good. The technical phrase for these, although they call them, obviously they've branded them as contrast paints, when I've obviously I've been using things like these washes, inks, there's a million different names for them, but in the realm of the military modeler, the 1/35th scale kind of tanks and weathering and what have you, where people take it very seriously with their airbrushes, they would call these a filter, I believe, because they give you one consistent sort of colour filter which is transparent over the top of a base colour. And because of that, the first tip for these is to make sure when you're using them to use the lighter colours first, because if you went on, for example, I've got a motorbike kind of command base here on plastic card. I think that's 40 by 40 base. Yeah, and this officer base, if I went on with a dark instantly, like they've got this contrast basilicum grey, I like to call it balsamic vinegar grey. If I went on with that, it would then not be possible to use the next filter up of say a yellow on something, if I wanted a yellow on there, or a brown, say, on the on some of the stowage on the back of the motorbike. So that's one really important tip with these, is to build up the layers. If you're going to put more than one layer on, start with a light tone, and then you can always go over the top with a darker one afterwards. And yes, that's my tip. First tip anyway, start with a light shade. If it doesn't work out, go from there. So if I zoom right into these to show you the existing work, which was done using traditional paints, if I can then get that in focus. Here we are. So Peter Pig 15mm World War I infantry on a standard base. These have actually had the army painter, you can see a swill of that's gone over the bottom, army painter put on as a final sort of coat before I did the base. And yeah, they kind of look as army painter things do. They've kind of gone that kind of candy apple style of having a brown wash from the army painter varnish. But the general result is pretty fair. It's a kind of an olive greeny colour, and I'm going to try and get the same sort of colour out of these from selecting the correct one of these pots. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but so it's going to be trial and error. And given that in World War I German infantry uniforms were running out pretty early on in the first year or so, they were putting on pyjamas or whatever they could grab hold of. So I don't think it's going to matter too much if I do some of the bases and accidentally put too darker or too lighter tone on there. I'll just roll with it on the basis that once you've got rows and rows of these, they'll all blend in together. But I'm going to give it a go. And then I've got kind of a company leader base, which I have just two on with a guy shouting. Again, I did a video on these actually on YouTube, so once I've uploaded this, once it's finished streaming, I'll put a link in the description to the actual video that did this, doing more traditional painting style. So before I start, it is worth mentioning straight away that these were painted using this highlighting technique with an airbrush. So they were sprayed black with a black primer initially, which you can see up underneath them, where when I turn it around, that's very black. And then I did a grey, a light dusting of grey from the top, and you can see if I get a pointy stick, something that will point, a brush will do, you can see that grey sort of fallen on, say, the back of that calf there. It's fallen on the jacket edges, the corners, and then even a lighter spray again from above has come down with a slight green tint in it. It's probably used that eggshell green from Vallejo on there, but it's been a couple of years. These have just been sat in a drawer, unfortunately. But that spray has come down and has just caught the helmets, it's caught the backpacks, and gives you that impression that you've got a kind of a pre-shaded model. In fact, if it was nighttime, that would be perfect already. It's ready to play. I only need to play at night with glow-in-the-dark dice, and they will look brilliant. But there you go. Then this one, interestingly enough, which has also had that same dusting from above, you can see how dark the underside is, and having sprayed from above, it's picked out the detail. Now what I'm hoping is, because of that pre-shading, when you go on with these contrast paints, which is essentially filters, because they're transparent, you will find that the colour shines through from underneath. So that could work for me. There's a couple of things worth doing, I think, to try and achieve this sort of army style paint job. I mean, it's not going to win competitions, but you can see there's enough detail in there. That's good enough for tabletop, and once you've got a lot of those together, they'll look good. In fact, I haven't finished the base on this because I'd normally put some static grass on. Okay, so what are the things I think I need to do before? And I think what I need to do before I put the contrast paints on is I need to pick out anything that I want to be metallic. And given that if I look at one that I did before, which wasn't using the Games Workshop contrasts, I can see the only metallics I've put on are on the rifle there. So I think I might try that. So I might just get a little bit of metallic paint and pop that on there. I'm going to use, they're not Citadel, they're not Games Workshop, these are privateer press paints, which I use a lot. This is Quicksilver, so I shall shake that up. And because this is fine detail, I'm going to get my magnifier out so you'll see a little bit extra blast of light coming in from the magnifier. And I just need to get things into a position where I can actually see the model. Okay, there we go. So as I said, I'm just doing this to give the Games Workshop contrast paint something to shine over for the metallic areas. I mean, these are so small at 15mm scale, and when you have these on the table, you're not really going to see this detail, but I'm just doing it as another example of the use of this contrast paint to see. It'll be the only thing on the model that's had any actual paint other than the airbrushing. And I know what I'm going to do is once this silver's on there, I'm going to use the same sort of brown over the whole gun stock and lock, stock and two smoking contrast washes essentially, because I'm not going to use different coloured contrast on there. The other side of that one needs a bit there, missed some. When you're live like this, it's quite easy to miss stuff, which I found last night. So yeah, I mean, that's in no way is that super detailed. You can see the one I did earlier, how that looks. So that's had a kind of a light brown paint as well as the silver, and then it's had the army paint over the whole lot. It looks quite sort of detailed really, given how small it is, but here we go with the contrast paint. So that's just the only thing I'm going to do on these models, and now I'm going to try and match as close as I can these more traditional Vallejo paints that were used on here. I can see already the boots are going to be snakebite leather. Oh, hi Matt. Good morning. Someone, can you hear me? I'm hoping someone can, because no one's put a comment yet, and it's now 16 minutes into the video. But yeah, so yeah, these are Peter Pig, Matt, Matthew. These are 15mm World War One, and I'm going to try and use these Games Workshop contrast paints to match how I did these ones before. I did a live, not a live video, but I did a video upload to YouTube of painting these German infantry. So I'm now going to, well, how am I going to do this? I've got to match these colours, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge. I shall come out a little bit so we can see what's going on. Right. So the first thing I know is, because I've used it last night, the snakebite leather is going to be good. Well, that's not right. If I can find it. Here we go. So that's the snakebite leather. I'm going to use that for the boots, nice and dark. So that's picked off for that. What else have I got on here to do? So there's the kind of webbing stuff. Well, that will be snakebite leather as well. And the helmet is almost a kind of a creamy colour. So there's a lighter one here. Skeleton Horde.
Lights doesn't support that.
Oh. Just having Amazon speak back to me. But contrast Skeleton Horde looks about right, unless there's a lighter one of that. Well, there's a Nasdrag layer. Okay, so this yellow, I think, would be, because it's not completely yellow, I think it'd be a good idea for that to go on the guns, a kind of a wood stock, because they were kind of quite pale, the German rifles, as I understand. So I'm going to use that contrast Nasdrag yellow on the guns. Skeleton Horde, it's like a lighter, it's sort of a lighter brown wash, but it's probably still a little bit dark, but maybe I can go on thin. That's too dark, this one. This is called Agaras Dunes. I think that's about the lightest thing they've got in terms of a brown for the helmets. I may go for the contrast yellow on the helmet as well, but that's probably going to be too yellowy. I'll see maybe a thin down one of this Skeleton Horde for the helmet. So the main uniform, how am I going to do that? So it's obviously a very darkish, dull green to grey, really, kind of a blend. And the nearest thing I can see in there, I mean, that's far too green, look at that, warp lightning. This one. So it's about the most military World War I, World War II. It looks like it needs shaking up as well. That's interesting. It does need shaking up. So there's obviously a pigment in there that's not fully blended in. I haven't used it yet. I'm going to put a ball bearing in there. Live ball bearing insertion to make sure that's got something to really shake that up. And see, it's still got that. It must be some sort of extra pigment in there. Live shaking of the citadel. Oh, it's coming, it's breaking free. Whatever it is at the bottom, that's settled. And that's interesting because with a brand new paint, you'd think they'd settle after a few months sitting, resting. But that's settled straight away. Whatever it is down there, I don't know. But I think that's going to be sort of okay for the uniform. Okay, so it's not got much in the way of grey in there. And then the faces. So do I just put some pink on there because these have got pink on there ready to put a wash on, or do I just go on with the pinky wash on the face? I think it's going to be no good on the black. I think it's going to be no good on the black without having some sort of paint on there already. So I'm going to have to, that's it, 2 things needed before you get started on these. You need to put a flesh colour on, so I'm just going to go with this Rin Flesh from Privateer Press, great paints. I've promised my son I'll build a train layout over the summer. Oh, that means I have about 6 weeks to break down, strip, rebuild and repaint a box full of second-hand Hornby buildings. Yeah, that sounds like a fun project. And how old is your son? I'm just trying to work out whether you're doing it for you or doing it for your son. Well, you're obviously doing it for you. It's a life experience. You do it together, don't you? That's how these things roll. So I'm going to do the faces because I just feel like if there's one other thing that needs paint on before you put these contrasts on there, it's going to be the faces. So I've done the gun stock, and I'm just going to put some pink on the faces and hands. I just don't think it will work without it. quite a heavily loaded brush. Yeah, just don't think, I mean, the contrast paints will go over the faces and things, but they're not going to, if the face is looking a bit black already because it hasn't had any spray down on it, it's going to look awful. A couple of spots have splashed up, but who cares? They'll all be covered up. Yeah, I just haven't got my eye in. It's too early on a Sunday. That'll do. So yeah, I've just put it on the faces, that flesh colour. So there are 2 stages as I'm working through here before you get to this contrast paint. I've had to put some metallic on the gun metal areas, and I've put some on their hands just so that the wash that goes on there will have something to shade, because essentially you won't be able to put a contrast if it's already black. Well, so let's get stuck in. So here are these colours. So this is this Militarum green, which I'm going to shake again because it's got this unusual junk at the bottom which needs shaking up. There it is. So on the principle of sort of doing the larger areas first, I'm going to do the main cloak, the main uniform. I'm just looking to see if I've got a little something I can decant some of this out in case I need to thin it. A little pot. And I will decant it out so you can see it properly as well. So there's the pot. Here's my little pipette. Oh, this pot's been used before. Oh. Decanted. You're welcome to lurk, Matthew. What time is it anyway? It's 11:30 Sunday morning. So there it is, decanted out. You can see how that's looking in there and how transparent and liquid this contrast paint is. And I'm now going to possibly thin it with some water. But either way, I'm going to start popping it on this model, on the uniform areas, to see how it looks and see if I can get anything like what I had already. What I haven't discussed is that I may still army painter these. With the varnish that they do, given that it will both protect them and adds a very darker wash of the varnish, but might not have to. You can see already how the fact these were pre-shaded means that that shows through. So I'm doing both the trousers. And the jackets. And I'm giving them a good covering. I mean, look, it's going on quite heavy because it is like a wash. It's not delicate. But you know, it's one coat because they've been pre-shaded. They are looking a bit greener than, I can see already, the greener than what I had on there before. So here's a good spot. So it's a very strong pigment, and you can see that given how thin the paint is, it's going on well on the darker areas. Back of that guy's trouser leg needs some. If you get too much on there, like I just dropped a huge drop there, just dry the brush off and the brush will draw some of it off. Where it's completely black, it obviously doesn't show as well, but it's still a filter, it's still giving you the impression on the darker areas. Typical paint style, that is that instead of finishing one, I dive between blank spots on each of them, which risks missing something. So yeah, that's gone okay. They'll be just drying there, and fortunately these guys, I mean, they haven't had their well, these ones have even had a base paint of a green. So we'll see here whether things improve even more if you've painted a base uniform colour on and use this as a wash. telling myself they're all going to come together soon when I get those faces done as well. And obviously they don't dry gloss, even though they look very wet. They just take a long time to dry. They do take longer, I think, to dry because you're putting quite a large pool on. You can see how they're going into the creases and crevices. While I've got these here now, these haven't had any paint other than the pre-shade, so they have a very strong contrast in between the light and dark areas on them. I've just gone over his holster, which I probably should have left so I could put brown on, because this is a very strong green. It will cover. Lost focus there a bit. Occasionally need to pause when that focus disappears. I haven't done the front of that officer's jacket there, or trousers. So how are these guys going that have been drying over here? So they're not too bad. You can see how the darker areas are being picked out because they were sort of shaded with the airbrush before. So that's not too bad. So now I'm going to try the snakebite leather on a few darker areas. So here's the snakebite leather. I think you'd call that colour sepia, wouldn't you? Somewhere between sepia and burnt umber. So I'm going to put this on the boots. Of course, they haven't had much paint on at all. They're kind of grey. But I'm hoping again the strong pigment is enough to pick it out. Given it is just a kind of a wash. Yeah, so if you've come late to viewing this, I've got one or two people viewing. These are Peter Pig World War I German Infantry 15mm, which I painted for a war game that I was writing and have written, just haven't published or finished, called Tommy's, which is a 15mm historical game. And I wanted to try the Games Workshop contrast paints out, because I've got an awful lot of these to do, and given that these really just are washes, I thought, give it a try. How quickly can I do these historical and nearly match how I used to paint them, which was kind of like a wash style anyway, because I pre-shaded these models with an airbrush before, so it wasn't a million miles away from using this kind of technique. But these are very strong pigment, like a filter really, these contrast paints. So I think the other thing I was going to do the snakebite leather in are the kind of webbing stuff around the chest, of bullet pouches and things. So these guys along here, and I'm not going to worry too much that it will be going over some of the uniform in these areas. It'll just add to the dark shade in there, but give it a slight brownness. I realise now as I'm working that I was going to do the water bottle and the bag the same colour. So there was sort of meant to be, I think, a canvas cover over the water bottles. And I've just noticed the other thing which I should have put silvering on, which is the shovel for digging out trenches. Yeah, so more of the, this is the snakebite leather, just on the webbing. So little guy at the back there, get in there. Yeah, as I say, that's one convenient thing. So there's a really good tip that's handy with these straight away. You can go on with a wash with this thin paint, contrast paint, kind of over where you've been before, with the knowledge that you're not going to have a load of weird overspill that looks like it's ruining your paint job, because I'm just simply going up on the webbing which is on the uniform. It's no worry that I may have some staining on the uniform with this brown, because it's just all going to dry as a kind of a shade. And I can already see I'm quite pleased with that guy's collar and other details showing through. And you can see it's now drying on that webbing bit there. And I think I've done their canteen bottles as well, on the basis that they might have a canvas cover on their metal bottles. I think these were metal boxes here as well, if I remember the uniform. So while that dries, I don't want to like go straight off away from the old Citadel new contrast colours, but I do now realise that I'd been doing those as metal cases, and also the shovel I was doing in a trench shovel. Oops. So when I get to do the sort of metal, when I'm doing the guns which I painted initially, if you were here earlier, these will be the other sort of bit that we'll be able to see what a metallic looks like with the Citadel, with the Games Workshop even, paints over, contrast paints going over them. Yeah, so they've just released these in the last week, these contrast paints, and they're the sort of latest and greatest thing. And I think people were a bit negative about some of the way things looked, just like a blobby wash with tide marks. But now people are getting hold of them and using them. It's clear that they can sort of fit into your painting workflow, and not necessarily, you don't necessarily just have to use them for a big army where you just want to wash things. So normally what I would do with these is I would have like about 8 bases of these together, in a row, and then I would do all the silver, all the brown, you know, all in a row. So taking my time here, which means I'm ducking in and out and making mistakes, like I didn't put the silver on this little case that they've got on their back, which I had been doing before. And on the shovel. No, there's a little bit more shovel to do over there. Right. That's the last bit of real painting with that silver done there, and that was this colour, Radiant Platinum, which is a really sort of bright Privateer Press P3 paint. So that was the snakebite leather that I put on previously onto the sort of webbing and bits on the uniform and on the boots, you know, and on the canteen and the whatever leathery thing that the little pack that the canteen sits on. The box on the back, I've done a kind of a light brown. In fact, I could have used the snakebite leather probably for the sort of whatever it is underneath the blanket sort of box thing. Anyway, let's have a look at this next colour which I was going to use. So where is it? It's this one, which I'm going to use on the flesh, and it's called Gulliman Flesh. So I'm just going to put that on the hands and face. I'm going to use a slightly bigger brush than I have been using to splash that on. So I'm going to use a graduate size 2 brush now. Pick up some of that. Pick up the right base. And this is going to splash it all over the faces and features. So this is the Gulliman brown. And of course it's going on a bit like something halfway between a filter and a wash, because it will cover the base, plus also go into the nooks and crannies. There's no harm in putting quite a large blob of it on as well with a big brush like this, because you'll be ensured that you're getting it into all the edges as well as the main surfaces. You can see at the back there that guy has not had any on that hand or that side of his face. Right, speeding along now because I'm taking a long time to this. Well, I'm just taking this in obviously because I haven't, you know, when you've nailed down a process and when you're doing a large set of models like these, I mean, just to show you again. I've got trays full of these guys to do over here behind me. In fact, I've got some Belgian infantry in here as well, World War I, Belgian tanks, kind of FT-17s. Well, actually they're French, but Belgian livery on there. You can see how many I've got in trays there. And I've got more trays like this, more trays like that. And when you're doing that, what you want to do is lock down your paint colours that you're doing, and then you just follow your process. Here I'm experimenting live to see whether I can do these in a similar enough colour scheme to what I've done before, using sort of Vallejo paints just thinned down and painted onto these. And obviously as I'm doing that, I'm noticing it is looking different because it's difficult to match it accurately, but it's looking good enough for me that it's grey green on their jackets and trousers and the leather boots. So I'm just working through to find a happy set of paints, and then I can do them a lot faster when I do a whole rank and file of them together. So it will feel a bit slower while I'm doing that. So I'm going back in again with the zoom. And I'm going to go straight onto this contrast yellow, which I was going to use on the helmets to give them a kind of slightly sandy, what's the sort of colour, sort of a khaki-esque colour. I am sort of tempted to paint these helmets because I think they had, basically, early World War One, they called one of these battles in Belgium called the Battle of Silver Helms because there were a large amount of German helmets left strewn around the battlefield after their cavalry charges failed against barbed wire and machine gun. The Belgian tactics were to sort of withdraw over a bridge which had a brewery on it, that still you can get the beer even now. But the Germans tore the wooden doors off the brewery and used it as a makeshift bridge that had been demolished to stop them getting over the river. However, the helmets were left around, and they called it the Battle of Silver Helms because there were so many of these helmets collected off the battlefields afterwards. But they obviously were a silvery metal inside. But as I understand it, they were mostly had stretched kind of material over the top of the metal to stop them shining when they started, the war proper. They didn't want to go running around in these showing their positions off. So anyway, that's enough random chat. I shall now do the next phase of these, if I can zoom in, which is the contrast yellow, which is called Nasdreg. I don't know what Nasdreg is, but I'm going to put it on there and just see. But this is a real tester because I think it's not going to look khaki, it's going to look a bit too brown. I'm relatively happy with that. I mean, it's slightly brighter and more sort of sepia coloured. It's looking a bit too yellow now. I'll come back to it, but it'll dry. I think that's close enough once that's dry. I'm going to go with it for now. Yes. What I haven't done is tried mixing these, and there's a kind of a greyish one that they do in the range, in this contrast paint range. And I'm wondering, I wonder if when it's drying more dull, as you can see here, it looks less sort of candy-like, and probably okay. Don't want it looking chocolate brown because it is a sort of a canvassy colour, but it's not too bad. I wonder what. I'll keep going. I'll let that dry. And I'm going to use that same colour on the gun stocks. I remember now. Because those hands haven't fully dried, there's a little bit of the hand wash coming off on there too. When I say coming off, I mean it's just sort of blending in with what I'm putting on, where it's pulled up around the edges of the hands. But there's no problem with that. Yeah, I've been assured by someone that their rifles were a kind of a mustardy, yellowy, but not bright yellow obviously, but the wood stock did look closer to the sort of more yellowy brown. obviously you could go to town with this and do the straps on those guns and everything, but this is just for rank and file tabletop, so it's not a case of being too worried about all the small details. It's more kind of splash it all over. So other metallic areas, I'm not going to do a brown on, I'm going to use this, where is it? There's a black tempar which is very, very black with a hint of blue, and then there's Griff Charger grey, so that's more grey. I think that's what I'll use, so it won't be go on too black. I know it's got a blue tint in it, but I'm going to put that on the shovel and on the backpack thing. Where I've painted in metallic. Speeding up a bit now. I mean, yeah, I'm putting a lot on, so kind of goes on quickly. I'm not 100% on that bluish, but it's going to dry matte. It's going to give that a darker shade around the metal that's gone on the on those areas. I'm going to just blast it now with make sure I've got nothing that's going to fall over, and just blast it with a hairdryer just to dry it out. I bet you enjoyed listening to that. And so, some thoughts. Basically, when you're playing with these guys on the tabletop, they are going to be a long way away and small. And there is a theory that says you should try and paint your models up a little bit brighter the smaller they get, because you know, I've seen some techniques where people say them you should go like 2 or so shades brighter than the actual colour of the uniforms, because otherwise they'll just be a lost black blur when they're so small on the table. You can see these are standing out more than the others, which are kind of blending in, but they also haven't had their brown paint on the bases, which I'd sort of rushed through on these. But they've now been sort of hit by that hairdryer to dry them out, and we can see features are doing okay as far as that, you know, because that contrast paint's gone on, it's dried quite nicely, it's gone onto the metallics and it's showing through. I need to come up with a plan on what I'm going to put on the blanket and that back plate. So I think I'm going to use this colour which I found earlier, which was this contrast skeleton horde. I do wonder about mixing these together just to see. Let's try that. Let's try and mix. So I'm going to get a bit of this skeletal horde. Find my little brush. Show you the mixing process. So I'm going to get a bit of this skeletal horde just on the edge of a brush. I don't want much because I'm only going to just do these few models here. then I'm gonna mix in some of this Apothecary Contrast Grey. So that's another one where it looks like some pigment is separating at the bottom. So it's another candidate for putting a couple of ball bearings, a ball bearing in there as an agitator to try and get some of that pigment knocked off the bottom. Live paint shaking. So you can see what that looks like. I'm gonna mix it. Let's see what happens. So I'm gonna knock some of that off there. I'm gonna mix it in with that. So that's gone in on the skeleton horde, and I've mixed in the Apothecary white, which is like a wash to go on white that would leave a grey filter over it. And the two things together are kind of looking okay. So to go on the blanket, which I wanted to sort of have a semblance of a kind of grey white look, but with the brown to give it some shade. Again, big brush, just splashing it all over. Doesn't matter that there's some overspill because it is just a wash, really, a filter. So you can see it's left some of that brown, but it's also got a kind of a creamy potential look to it from that Apothecary grey that's gone on there too. Interesting combination. Yeah, there's still some shine off them, but I think a dull coat on there would trim them up nicely. I can see I'm missing some of that yellow from the back of that gun there. If anything, I think that it's covered maybe the metal rifling too much, and maybe I should have avoided putting the Nasdrag contrast yellow on the complete gun. I maybe should have stuck to putting it on the stock so that I could have kept some silvery bits exposed. So if anything there now, that would take a very light dry brush, wouldn't it? So let's do that on the gun. Let's do that with a little dry brush, a big dry brush, size 2 graduate. These are kind of cheap. It's a flat one, good for dry brushing. So I'm just taking a bit of that, what silver am I using? Platinum, radiant platinum. Just put a bit of that on there. So obviously I'm doing it like this because I don't want to take time to re-silver these. I just want to dry brush it on quickly, because if you're doing an army, you don't want to spend ages detailing those. Oops, better zoom in. Yeah, and that's kind of working out for me. Just a quick dry brush on the edges of where I had the sort of gun sort of rifling metal parts. Maybe on this, just highlight the edge of the shovels as well. So yeah, that's a filter technique, isn't it? My observations are that it's good coverage. that colour is a good military colour. Where's it gone again? The one that I used on the main jackets, contrast militarum green. I think if I had more time, I might be able to get closer to my existing paint jobs. They've gone in a bit green compared to what I had, which was a sort of duller browner green. But and these have had a dull coat on them, so there's some shine off these too. And it does make a difference when you get the base on there too. But yeah, they're not too bad. If anything, maybe I should think about how I could maybe have the helmets look less yellow, I think is the word. But yeah, I just wanted to experiment with these and just do this quick video. I mean, totally randomly, last night I had another play with these colours on this and went to sort of, I was really experimenting. I did layers of the washes here to see how they layer up, and they do layer up really well because they're so fine and thin. I hadn't done the blade yet, but I did just splash some of the red on there just to see what it looked like, but that blade has just been pre-shaded. So this was an airbrushed pre-shaded model. Snakebite leathers down the back, that yellow, the Nasdrag yellow on these side armour plates, armour shoulder plates, and I used the orc skin, which wasn't really, it's a bit dark. I probably should have thinned it down, but it has sort of highlighted some of the areas there. And this is just, I painted brass balls, brass colour on here, and then did a wash again of the various browns and things. I haven't really finished it though. It was just a quick half, play around with these contrast paints to see how they go on. So you can use them on larger models. They're definitely, it is a wash. If you really want to add more tone and detail into there, you need to paint it rather than just splash a wash over. But for getting something on the table quick and then picking out details to highlight a couple of details, they're great paints. And yeah, I'm enjoying using them. I think as I learn to mix them a bit, I'll probably be able to get closer to what I want to do for these German World War I infantry. But I'm happy so far with that result. Boots are good, the leathery bits are good. It's just the helmet probably that would need maybe making look at a little bit more sort of khaki-ish or pale sand. So which means I need to find one of these that's got less yellow in it to mix it up. But otherwise, yeah, I'm happy with that for the sort of rank and file. And this again, you can see how this one was painted a more traditional technique. I've got kind of quite a reddish boot, leathery colour, but because I've painted on the jackets, they're a bit stronger rather than being just this sort of filter, which has come out a bit greener. But yeah, different styles. You don't have to be absolutely historically accurate with everything you do, because particularly around this time the uniforms were so changeable. They just grabbed whatever they could. That's it. So this has been fun. I'm going to switch back out to. Oh, if I press the right button. No, I haven't pressed the right button. Oh, I'll have to switch back out with this. There. So thank you very much for listening in if you have. And Matthew, good luck with your railway project. It's good fun doing that kind of stuff. I know when I had kids, I got into railway scale electrics again. I've got boxes of scale electrics I need to do something with. That I've got out and played with the kids when they were young, and the Lego, of course. Brio when they're really young. Is it Brio? Those wooden trains. So yeah, thanks very much for listening in. And yeah, this has been me talking about these contrast paints and trying to paint some 15mm World War One. And I will do some more guides to these paints as I learn them, because I'll need to learn how to blend them together and certainly fit them into my workflow. What I might find is that they're good for maybe doing a wash on a uniform or a gun, but I might want to use something different somewhere else. definitely happy with the way they turn out on the flesh using the, I shall tell you one I used on the flesh again, which was really good. Gunningham, what was it called? That's the skeleton horde. That's it, yeah, the contrast. This one's good for flesh, and it's called Gulliman flesh. I've no idea what that means, but yeah, that's a very good one to go over flesh for just a quick wash for a very fast technique. That's it. So thanks for listening in. I shall stop streaming now and see you again soon with the next video. So please like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Appreciate comments too if you want to put some on there. Cheers.